The city and UMass Boston are working with the Dorchester Historical Society on a People's History project to tell us about exploring the past in Boston's most populous neighborhood. Are the city archivist, John McColgan, and a graduate student from UMass, Taylor Finch. Thank you both very much for being with us. I want to start with Taylor. Talk about this project, because I guess there's a professor at UMass Boston who was sort of bringing a lot of this into play.
Right. Well, at UMass, Professor Vincent Canato kind of started partnering with John to start using student research to kind of probe into Dorchester's history. So all the students in his research and methods class, we started researching our own aspects of Dorchester history that we found interesting. And then after that, we kind of took all of those projects and presented them at some community events that John helped to organize. And this next project is kind of a push to build off of those projects and to push out into the community and find out what the community wants us to know.
John, it sounds like you're getting some feedback here, you're getting some sources. So this is what, I guess this is what you mean by people's history.
People's history, yeah, sure. Well, local history is so important to the community itself. People's awareness of their own history empowers them. A community's awareness of its history empowers that community. And Dorchester has a huge history. It goes back to the founding of America in the 17th century. And Dorchester has had played a significant role in national history and local history. And as you were saying, there are so many people. It's Boston's largest neighborhood, and I think it's Boston's most diverse neighborhood as well. And there are so many ethnic groups in Dorchester, so many languages spoken in Dorchester, and I see Dorchester as sort of a unblended soup, if you will. There are African Americans, there are Vietnamese, there are Latinos, there are Cape Verdeans, there are Irish, there are other European ethnicities in Dorchester. And we're all in our own communities, but it is important for each of us to be aware of our own history. And I think once a community is aware of its own history, an ethnic community is aware of its own history that lives in the same place as other ethnicities, then me being secure in my history, I should be secure in learning the history of other groups.
Taylor, you took a look at a part of the history in the early 1970s, I think. This is a time, Dorchester's always been in flux, but this was, I think, flux to the nth degree around this particular period, and some of it was pretty contentious, and you looked at a group of activists called the People First. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to focus my project on the People First, and basically a new era of community activism that started up in Dorchester in the 70s. And what that was an influx of students coming from Harvard and BU into Dorchester to try to start organizing the community for welfare programs and for anti-war protests and things like that. And that they partnered with a lot of people in the community who wanted change in their community, but they didn't know exactly how to organize it. And so kind of it was a really great blend of the educated from the universities who had spent a lot of the 60s protesting and organizing, and people from Dorchester who saw their community changing and they wanted to do something about it. So I was lucky. I got to talk to a lot of really great people who were involved in the People First: Amy Merrill, Michael Ansara, Mike Prokosh, and a Vietnam vet named Dusty McGuire, who was also in the organization. And they all had different viewpoints and a great story to tell of basically that whole era and what they built. And there's still some legacy of what they built.
And of course, one of their campaigns concerned the response to changes by a certain judge in Dorchester District Court, Jerome Troy.
Yes. Jerome Troy was, I think that Amy Merrill told me that he was like the lord of a fiefdom in Dorchester, and he kind of just treated the whole place the way he wanted, and he was getting away with a lot of corrupt things. So the community came to People First, and they filed. They got some lawyers, and they ended up doing a long lawsuit. But there was a huge petition, I think in 1971 or so, that got thousands of resident signatures, and they brought it to these lawyers, and eventually they ended up getting Jerome Troy disbarred from the Massachusetts bench.
Jerome Troy, that was sort of a household name when you were growing up, wasn't it?
So when I was growing up, yes, it was. Well, it kind of goes way back in my family history. My father ran for city council in 1940 and 1950 and beat Judge Troy in that race. Yeah.
No, I have to confess, the first time I heard of TPF, I was just out of college. I had grown up in another neighborhood, and TPF, that's the Tactical Police Force.
Right, yeah.
But you have a little, you went to their office?
I did. I went to their office one time, I think it was in Bowdoin Street, and they had a little newspaper going there, and they had people coming in and out all the time, and one of the visitors one evening was Howard Zinn. And Howard Zinn came in, and he was wondering why there was so much racial divide in Boston, and he thought that the white people there would be enriched by more connection with the African American community. And I think this was probably found by a lot of the white people there as inscrutable at the time. But
this is BNN News. We're talking about a People's History of Dorchester with City Archivist John McColgan and Taylor Finch from UMass Boston. Taylor, as you certainly learned when you were doing your research about the TPF, this wasn't just a bunch of activists that made waves and moved on. And you mentioned people like Mike Prokosh. They stayed. And they're very much part of the fabric of the community now.
Absolutely, and they all have narratives and stories to bring to the table that haven't really been explored extensively in Dorchester, and so we're lucky Mike Prokosh is going to be attending our event on Saturday, and we're looking for him and for other community members to come and bring those stories to us and tell us what they want us to know about their community and its history, so we can build the collective people's history of Dorchester and not just an academic one. You have
to be a good listener. What was it like sitting down with people?
It was wonderful. I was so lucky to sit down. A couple people I met with Mike. I didn't meet with Mike. I spoke with him over the phone, but I met with Michael Ansara and I met with Amy Merrill, and those were 2 or 3 hour coffee house conversations that we had that started off with their recollections and kind of ended up talking about the state of affairs today and what activists can do and community members can do to kind of make waves in their communities still today, and what we're seeing with the political climate in the country and in Boston. So it was wonderful.
John, at least within your lifetime, what is it about Dorchester history that makes it stand and proud, or maybe that you're most proud of?
What am I most proud of Dorchester history? Its roots are very deep. I see Dorchester symbolized in the sculpture in Edward Everett Square, in the Great Pear, the great
clap
pear.
Yes.
Because when we were putting that together, the artist went back to the clap pear, the fruit farms, so it's an historical symbol in that way. But it's more than that. It's also a symbol of sustenance, a symbol of life that Dorchester has afforded to people from so many different places and from so many different time frames. For hundreds of years, people have been coming to Dorchester, finding life there, finding business there, growing their families. So I think Dorchester has that to be proud of, but it needs to also come together as sort of a consciousness. There are, as I said, so many different ethnicities, so many different groups of people who live there. They're all from Dorchester, but they're living in separate segments. So how do you blend that together? How do you develop a consciousness, an historical consciousness that all these diverse peoples can draw upon, can feed upon? What commonality do they have? And the commonality that they have is the history. And if they can understand better, research better their own individual history, they will be in a position to better understand the history of their neighbors as well. And this is what they have in common with.
Thank you both very much, John McColgan and Taylor Finch.
Thank you.